Tonight we begin with a development that U.S. officials, intelligence analysts, and Middle Eastern observers had feared, prepared for, and hoped would never actually materialize. A midnight threat issued by Iran's President Pezeshkian that unfolded not over weeks of diplomacy, but in the span of mere hours. Hours that shattered the fragile regional equilibrium. Hours that forced the White House Situation Room into emergency session. Hours that prompted an immediate and devastating Israeli response. What Pezeshkian did today crossed a line that Netanyahu had hoped would hold, a red line that had been explicitly communicated through back channels, public statements, and strategic positioning for the better part of 2 years. And when that line broke, Netanyahu did not hesitate. He responded with decisiveness, overwhelming force, and a precision that left Tehran's military establishment scrambling to assess the damage. For the past 6 months now, there had been signals, not from official Iranian government statements, not from formal diplomatic channels, just signals that Tehran was preparing something unprecedented in scale. Iran has been aggressive, yes, but they have been calculated in their aggression. Their moves have followed a certain pattern, a predictable rhythm, almost a choreography. But what set off alarm bells in Washington, Tel Aviv, and Riyadh this past week was that the pattern went silent. Intelligence analysts who monitor Iranian military movements know the indicators. The routine social media messaging from Revolutionary Guard commanders, the ceremonial displays of military hardware and personnel, the carefully timed statements about retaliation and resistance, the sudden repositioning of air defense systems, the public declarations of readiness that usually precede Iranian operations, all of that went quiet. Completely quiet. And whenever Iran goes quiet, when the rhetoric stops, when the posturing ends, when the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps stops broadcasting their movements, intelligence professionals understand what it means. It means something is about to get loud, very loud. Early this morning, approximately 3 a.m. Eastern Time, intelligence operatives detected what they described as an unprecedented mobilization of Iran's ballistic missile infrastructure, including the movement of Shahab-3 and Fateh, 110 systems that had not been deployed for active readiness in over 18 months. These are the kinds of assets that Iran only brings to this level of operational status when they are signaling something very specific, an imminent strike, a dramatic escalation of the conflict, or a fundamental shift in their strategic posture toward Israel. Observers in multiple intelligence agencies didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know with absolute certainty was that Iran was changing its military posture fundamentally. And when a nation-state with Iran's capabilities shifts its strategic posture without explanation, even by a small measure, American intelligence agencies, Israeli military command, and regional partners pay immediate attention. By 5 a.m., the intelligence assessment had reached the Oval Office. By 6 a.m., it had been briefed to the National Security Council. By 7 a.m., it had been communicated directly to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu through what sources described as an extremely urgent back-channel communication. And by 8 a.m., everyone involved had reached the same conclusion. Pezeshkian was not bluffing. He was preparing for something. The warning issued by the White House today was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. It was explicit. It was delivered through every available channel. Officials within the National Security Council described Iran's mobilization as unprecedented in scope, destabilizing to the entire region, and perhaps most importantly, incompatible with continued American restraint in Middle Eastern affairs. That last phrase matters. That is the language used when the United States is preparing to authorize or support actions it has previously advised against. But warnings only work if the target hesitates, if they pause, if they reconsider. Netanyahu did not. In fact, his response today was among the most immediate and comprehensive military operations we've witnessed in the Israeli-Iranian proxy conflict in years. Here's what we know. Within 90 minutes of the formal American intelligence briefing, the Israeli Air Force launched what military analysts are describing as a preemptive degradation operation, targeting Iranian ballistic missile facilities, command and control centers, and launch infrastructure across 4 separate provinces. These weren't conventional airstrikes. These were electronically coordinated, GPS-guided operations involving 15 fighter jets equipped with the latest Israeli-developed systems, drone strikes from multiple launch platforms, and cyber operations that reportedly disabled Iranian air defense systems in real time. Sources familiar with the operation describe it as among the most technically sophisticated strikes in modern Middle Eastern warfare. Tonight, multiple sources confirmed that Netanyahu's forces launched coordinated attacks on Iranian ballistic missile production facilities near Isfahan, strategic weapons storage depots in Khuzestan province, launch preparation sites in the Tehran region, and command centers responsible for coordinating Iranian military operations against Israel. Israel struck before Iran could fully mobilize. They hit production facilities that had been recently activated. They hit storage depots that had been brought online for operations. They hit launch preparation sites that were likely minutes away from becoming fully operational. In other words, Israel targeted the backbone of Iran's immediate strike capability, not just the weapons themselves, but the infrastructure, the expertise, the command structures that would have made a sustained Iranian offensive possible. This is what made the American intelligence warning so urgent. Pezeshkian's mobilization wasn't just rhetorical posturing. It represented an actionable threat. It represented a military posture that could have resulted in hundreds of Israeli casualties if left unchecked. It represented a threshold that could have triggered an even wider regional conflict. And Netanyahu, understanding those stakes fully, responded with coordinated, overwhelming force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, not with weapons of mass destruction or civilian targeting, but strategically. They didn't launch carpet-bombing campaigns across Iranian cities. They didn't attack civilian infrastructure or population centers. They hit military targets with precision. They hit command structures with coordination. They hit the operational capacity that Pezeshkian had specifically mobilized hours earlier. According to initial damage assessments from intelligence sources, approximately 70% of Iran's immediately available ballistic missile capacity has been either destroyed or rendered inoperable in the short term. Not destroyed permanently, Tehran can rebuild, but degraded, significantly degraded, enough to change the military calculus, enough to make any immediate Iranian retaliation dramatically more difficult, enough to send a message that Netanyahu had received the midnight threat and responded decisively. And here's where the story becomes even more consequential. Intelligence analysts now believe that Pezeshkian's latest move was designed to test the restraint of the Netanyahu government after months of what Tehran perceived as Israeli weakness, a period when Israel had absorbed Iranian and Hezbollah attacks without mounting the kind of overwhelming counter-response that had characterized Israeli military doctrine for decades. Pezeshkian wanted to see whether Netanyahu would respond with limited strikes, diplomatic protests, or measured escalation. But instead, the opposite happened. Netanyahu and his military command didn't attempt half measures. They launched a comprehensive operation that was so decisive, so coordinated, so professionally executed that even Tehran's hardline military establishment was reportedly shocked by its speed and scope. You don't get Iran's undivided attention easily. Iran's military has absorbed years of Israeli strikes in Syria and Iraq without fundamental strategic shifts. But today, Netanyahu got Tehran's attention completely. Intelligence officials speaking with major news outlets under condition of anonymity described Pezeshkian's mobilization as a calculated risk, an attempt to reassert Iran's position as the regional leader of resistance against Israel, while simultaneously testing American and Israeli resolve. But Netanyahu proved today that the period of Israeli restraint has ended. He proved that when threatened directly, Israel remains both militarily formidable and willing to act. His operational response wasn't only tactically sophisticated, it was sophisticated enough that it demonstrated Israel maintains real-time intelligence on Iranian military movements, can coordinate complex strikes across multiple platforms, and can execute them with minimal warning to the target. That capability matters because it shows Israel's intelligence apparatus remains world-class. It shows that Israel is not a reactive power waiting for threats to materialize. They are an active power with the capacity to see threats coming and eliminate them before they become reality. As reports continued coming in throughout the afternoon and evening, we learned more about the scope of Netanyahu's response. Israeli F-15 jets carried out precision strikes against the Koger missile production facility near Tehran, forcing temporary evacuation of the entire complex. Combined air and drone operations targeted the Parchin military complex that had been used for ballistic missile testing in the last 72 hours. Special operations units reportedly operating within Iranian airspace and electronic warfare domains disabled Iranian radar systems that would have been used to coordinate a counterstrike against Israel. This wasn't just a symbolic demonstration of military capability. This wasn't just a diplomatic message delivered through military means. This was a comprehensive operational response. This was a fundamental assertion of Israeli military dominance. And comprehensive operational response is the one thing that Tehran has struggled to counter since the creation of Israel's Iron Dome and aero defense systems. For every ballistic missile Iran has acquired or developed, Israel has deployed countermeasures that have made those missiles less effective. For every strategic position Iran has gained in Syria or Iraq, Israel has responded with strikes that have negated those gains. Tonight was simply the latest iteration of that pattern, but more decisive, more coordinated, and more directly aimed at Iranian homeland targets than previous operations. Remember, Pezeshkian thought his midnight threat would intimidate Netanyahu. He thought the mobilization of ballistic missile systems would force the United States to pressure Israel into negotiations. He thought the implicit message, back down or face Iranian military power, would be received as credible. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Netanyahu has called the bluff completely. The United States has authorized a response it had previously advised against. And Iran now faces the reality that its military posture can be degraded faster than it can be rebuilt. What makes this moment so consequential and so dangerous is that Pezeshkian's latest move happened at a time when he is under extraordinary domestic pressure. Conservative hardliners in Tehran want escalation and confrontation with the West. Moderate reformers within Iran's government want negotiation and sanctions relief. Revolutionary Guard commanders want freedom to pursue proxy operations across the region. Economic officials want to stabilize Iran's currency and attract foreign investment. Pezeshkian is balancing these demands while simultaneously managing the reality that his country's economy is deteriorating, his military capabilities are being systematically degraded, and his regional position has weakened dramatically since Netanyahu took office. When leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from desperation. They're doing it from the need to prove to their domestic constituencies that they remain capable of standing up to Israel and the West. And that desperation made them predictable. That desperation made them vulnerable. That desperation gave Netanyahu exactly the opening he needed to respond decisively. The White House's official statement, now distributed through every diplomatic channel, was designed to signal that the United States is not willing to allow Iranian ballistic missile strikes against Israel. American officials said plainly that Pezeshkian's mobilization was inconsistent with international norms and threatening to regional stability. That is deliberately cautious diplomatic language for, "We knew about it before you executed it. We authorized Netanyahu's response, and we are warning you not to attempt retaliation." You don't usually hear that tone from the White House unless something serious is at stake, unless American lives might be affected, unless the region is on the brink of wider conflict, unless the administration is preparing the American public for potential escalation. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu addressed the Israeli Knesset in a defiant, determined address tonight. He said, "We will not allow Iran to build a nuclear weapons capability under the guise of peaceful purposes, nor will we allow Iranian ballistic missiles to threaten our people." He said, "Israel's response today was swift, precise, and comprehensive. We targeted the military infrastructure that was prepared to strike our citizens." And he said, "The message to Iran is clear. You cannot hide behind regional proxies, you cannot shield your military from Israeli intelligence, and you cannot threaten the state of Israel without consequences." These are not rhetorical flourishes or political posturing. These are statements from a leader in a military command that understands exactly how high the stakes have become and who has decided that the period of measured restraint has ended. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning to regional analysts. Pezeshkian's midnight mobilization wasn't isolated. Along with the ballistic missile readiness order, Hezbollah in Lebanon reportedly increased weapons transfers from Iran and positioning of advanced systems targeting northern Israel. Houthi forces in Yemen expanded their drone operations targeting commercial shipping in the Red Sea and threatening American naval assets. Iraqi militias aligned with Tehran increased their movements and stockpiling of weapons in preparation for potential operations. All of this happened within the same 48-hour period. When Iran moves multiple proxy forces at once while simultaneously mobilizing its own ballistic missile arsenal, it means something larger, something more comprehensive is underway. It means Tehran isn't attempting a limited strike. It means they're attempting a coordinated regional escalation. And it means Netanyahu understood the full scope of the threat immediately. Intelligence analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Pezeshkian is preparing for a direct military confrontation with Israel. Expecting American support will ultimately force a ceasefire in Israel's favor. Another is that Pezeshkian is attempting to demonstrate Iranian military capability to domestic audiences, knowing the operation will likely fail, but hoping the attempt itself will bolster his political position. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Pezeshkian is attempting to bait Netanyahu into a response so devastating that it triggers international outrage and forces the Biden administration to distance itself from Israeli operations. But today, Netanyahu took that calculated risk and responded anyway. He didn't attempt a limited strike designed to minimize international criticism. He didn't avoid targeting infrastructure that might generate diplomatic backlash. He didn't hesitate out of concern for world opinion. He launched the most comprehensive response in years. What we're watching now is a test of fundamental strategic will. Pezeshkian wants to see whether Netanyahu will accept Iranian military capability as a permanent fact of regional life. Netanyahu wants to demonstrate that Iran's military posture can be unilaterally degraded by Israeli military action. The United States wants to prevent the conflict from escalating into a direct American-Iranian military confrontation. And regional allies like Saudi Arabia and the UAE want to prevent the conflict from destabilizing the Abraham Accords framework and their own security arrangements. These four objectives are not necessarily compatible, and as night falls across the Middle East, each party is making calculations about what comes next. Tonight, we've heard from sources within the Israeli Defense Ministry who are now conducting detailed damage assessments. They say the strikes were successful beyond initial expectations, with secondary explosions at multiple facilities indicating intact weapons systems were destroyed. They say the operation removed approximately 72 hours of Iran's strike capability, meaning even if Tehran attempts retaliation, their current arsenal is significantly degraded. And intelligence sources say Pezeshkian's decision to mobilize ballistic missiles is likely part of a broader strategy intended to force American intervention on Iran's behalf by creating a humanitarian crisis or triggering civilian casualties that the international community would find unacceptable. But Netanyahu is not hesitating in response to that calculation. In fact, Netanyahu is escalating in exactly the way that demonstrates he will not be deterred by international pressure. His response today, militarily sophisticated, diplomatically backed, and strategically calculated, sent a message to Pezeshkian that Iran's threats will be met with action. And it sent a message to the international community that Israel will make its own security decisions regardless of diplomatic pressure. As the night goes on, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Pezeshkian hoped to achieve with his midnight threat. But what we do know is that Netanyahu's response was timely. It prevented a potential Iranian strike before it could be executed. It demonstrated Israel's capability to degrade Iranian military infrastructure at will. And it established that the era of limited Israeli responses to Iranian provocation has ended. What happens next will depend on what Iran does in the next 48 to 72 hours. If they attempt retaliation, this moment will be remembered as the opening strike in a major regional conflict. If they attempt diplomatic negotiations, Netanyahu and his military command have already shown they are operationally ready for whatever comes next. They have shown they are willing to respond. They have shown they can execute complex operations with precision. They have shown they will not be deterred by international opinion or diplomatic pressure. And tonight, for the first time in months, Tehran appears to be recalculating. The Revolutionary Guard headquarters is quiet. The Iranian government's media channels are quiet. Tehran is quiet. Too quiet. And when Iran is quiet following a military setback, it means leadership is processing what just happened. It means they are choosing their next move with extreme care. Because tonight, Iran learns something it has been learning repeatedly since Netanyahu took office. Threats have consequences. Mobilization has risks. And Israeli military capability remains unmatched in the region. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is absolutely clear. The balance of power has shifted decisively in Israel's favor. The Iranian threat has been degraded significantly in the short term. And the international community has witnessed that military escalation by Iran will be met with overwhelming Israeli response. And we will be here, watching every detail, analyzing every development, and reporting every update as this consequential moment unfolds in real time.